America returns to the moon again, this time to stay.
This is the Moon Base, the first human city on another world to be built by NASA. And today, thanks to modern technology, we can actually take a stroll through humanity's first settlement beyond Earth. We'll peek into the habitat modules, the dining areas, and yes, even the toilets. We'll find out what the future space pioneers will eat, what they'll drive, and what they'll actually be doing up there. So, grab yourself a cup of coffee, and let's go. A lunar settlement. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? Just 100 years ago, in 1926, Robert Goddard launched his first liquid-fueled rocket, and it flew for exactly 2 seconds. Today, we're boarding rockets to fly back to the moon and eventually to Mars. Who knows? Maybe in another 100 years, our grandkids will be leaving footprints on the dusty trails of planets in some entirely different galaxy. But let's not forget, the moon isn't a desert, a jungle, or a deserted island. It's a vastly more dangerous and uninhabitable place. This world was never meant for humans. Nature didn't plan for us to ever leave the African forests, let alone fly into space. Literally everything on the moon is dangerous and deadly to our bodies. The freezing cold, the radiation, the complete lack of atmosphere, the razor-sharp lunar dust, the constant meteorite bombardments. So why does NASA believe a human can survive in these harsh conditions? And what exactly have they prepared for the first settlers of our very first extraterrestrial city?
Hello, you are watching The Universe with Alex. And I'm Alex Sheen. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Here, we talk about space in plain English.
Have you ever wondered where an astronaut will sleep on the moon? Obviously, it's not going to be some beautiful country home where you can grow tomatoes in the backyard. I'm talking about reality here. Nighttime, the lunar South Pole. Outside, there's a vacuum, dust, radiation, and temperatures in the shadows that can turn any piece of modern tech into a brittle chunk of metal. Meanwhile, inside, a tiny pressurized volume, a person is trying to get some sleep. And they are separated from this incredibly hostile world by just a thin wall of plastic. Next to them, the ventilation hums, a life support system clicks somewhere in the background. Food packets are strapped to the corner, and the walls are covered in tools, tablets, manuals, and cables. And this person is probably not thinking about the grandeur of human civilization. They're thinking, man, I hope the toilet works okay tomorrow.
NASA has officially unveiled the Moon Base, the future home for the Artemis mission astronauts near the lunar South Pole. This isn't just a plant the flag and leave kind of deal. It's a blueprint for humanity's gradual colonization of other planets.
The very first outpost of the conquerors. Initially, there will be short landings to demonstrate the tech. Then, the rovers will arrive. Power grids and communication arrays will be set up, followed by the first habitat modules, tiny at first, then larger living spaces. NASA isn't drawing up one massive lunar city right off the bat. NASA is building a chain. Fly there, live a bit, test things out, leave the hardware behind, come back, and add the next layer, and so on year after year, much like how the first Europeans colonized America back in the day.
And this is where it gets interesting. Because the word base sounds glorious, but if you strip away the heroic veneer, a base starts with some very basic questions.
Where am I going to live? What am I going to eat? How am I going to wash up? Where's the bathroom? What will I drive to work? And what happens if this thing breaks down 3 miles from the module? Will I be able to walk back home, or should I fly back on a jetpack? Let's start with housing. For the first few missions, the astronauts' home will be the lander itself. NASA described the early Artemis missions like this. The Human Landing System, HLS, will act as both transportation and temporary lunar housing. You arrive on the surface, touch down on the landing legs, open the hatch, and boom, there's your apartment on the moon. A very expensive, very cramped, incredibly high-tech apartment that you really need to make sure can get you back to orbit. I actually love this domestic harshness. We often picture a lunar base as a standalone house sitting on the surface, but the first Artemis crews will be living inside a ship that just survived a landing. It's as if you took an elevator the size of a small house to another world and said, well guys, this is now our bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, storage unit, and lifeboat all rolled into one. Romantic? Sure. Comfortable? I wouldn't say so. Later on, NASA wants to transition to a fixed habitat module on the surface. In the older Artemis base camp concept, NASA explicitly listed 3 main domestic elements: a lunar cabin, a rover, and a mobile home. Eventually, this habitat module should be able to host up to 4 astronauts for about a month-long stay, with the ultimate goal of extending surface living time to 2 months. Yep, you heard that right. The very first lunar city will have a population of exactly 4 people. Tough luck if you like chatting with your neighbors or dropping by for a visit. There's not exactly a lot of room to roam here. But for introverts and hermits, it's an absolute dream. Now, take a look at this habitat module. It's no beach house, that's for sure. It's more like a tiny polar research station, except instead of Antarctica, it's on the moon. Inside, you've got a pressurized volume, oxygen systems, CO2 scrubbers, filters, computers, sleeping quarters, food, water, waste management, clothes, tools, medical kits, comms gear, and repair kits. Here on Earth, we're used to the idea that a house is a space for living. On the moon, a house is a machine that works 24/7 to keep you from dying. Because of this, everything inside is strapped down. There's no putting your mug on the table or hanging your work clothes on a hook. In the weak lunar gravity, things fall slower, but they still fall. In a cramped module, any loose item becomes a hazard. A food pouch, a tool, a glove, a cap, a wipe, everything must have its designated spot. The first lunar residents won't be living in an interior design showcase. They'll be living in an organized chaos dictated by engineering necessity. In every corner, something is strapped down, tied off, labeled, and logged in an inventory book. The beauty of this home doesn't lie in its decor, but in its utility. That's how crucial every single inch, every single corner is.
And the most pressing issue: food. What is NASA going to feed these future pioneers?
Well, I have some good news for you. Space food hasn't been that tasteless, nutritious paste squeezed out of a tube like you see in old sci-fi movies for a long time. For Artemis 2, NASA listed 189 menu items and over 10 different beverages. They've got coffee, smoothies, tortillas, nuts, beefsteak, cauliflower, mac and cheese, pumpkin, cookies, and chocolate. So no, an astronaut won't be sadly chewing on a gray cube labeled Ration Variant B every day. Space food isn't just a health and life support system, it's a crucial element for boosting morale and productivity. But on the moon, food will still be consumed under conditions of extreme scarcity. There is no let me just open the fridge and see what we have. Every single gram is either brought from Earth or produced by the base's systems. Every wrapper eventually becomes trash. Every drop of water has to be accounted for. And this is where a very human element comes into play. Taste becomes a part of survival. If you're living in a cramped module far from Earth, surrounded by a gray wasteland, a good dinner is no longer just calories. It's a psychological anchor. It's a slice of normal life. To be honest, I completely understand why coffee made the space menu. If they sent me to a lunar base and said, "Alex, we've got the grand future of humanity right here, but we forgot to pack the coffee," I would immediately demand a total review of the mission architecture. You can survive the dust, you can survive the cramped module, but a lunar morning without coffee isn't a life, it's a punishment. What about hygiene? Things are a bit grimmer when it comes to taking a shower. There won't be a proper, full-on shower like you have at home on the early lunar base. And it's not because NASA engineers hate comfort. It's simply because water on the moon is way too precious to waste by standing under a warm stream philosophizing about the fate of civilization. In space missions, hygiene works differently. A tiny amount of water, liquid soap, special towels, wipes, no-rinse shampoo, strict rationing, and recycling. It might sound funny, but this is actually where the real adult side of space exploration begins. We love talking about rockets, but a true base starts with water. You need water to drink, to cook, to stay clean, to generate oxygen, to cool systems, and to grow plants in future experiments. NASA is already testing wastewater recycling systems for future lunar and Martian habitat modules. Personally, I think that's beautiful. On Earth, wastewater is just sewage, but on the Moon, it's a critical resource. Up there, even dirty water is future oxygen, future food, future life.
Now we get to the more intimate stuff. What about the toilet? I know, it's not the most glamorous topic, but without this device, there won't be any lunar civilization.
I know, it's not the most glamorous topic, but without this device, there won't be any lunar civilization. In its survival standards, NASA explicitly outlines the requirements for food, personal hygiene, waste management, privacy, storage, housekeeping, sleep, and psychological health. In other words, engineering thought doesn't stop at the rocket. It goes all the way down to asking, where is a person going to get some privacy? How will the smell be vented? How will the waste be isolated from the dining area? And how do you service and fix all of this? I wouldn't want to use the kind of toilet that these future settlers will have to visit. I'll be completely honest with you. Would you? Just imagine a tiny, cramped module and your coworkers are right behind a thin plastic wall. A toilet like this is the pinnacle of engineering. Every single system inside it is hooked up to the station's main life support. Everything has to be airtight, reliable, odorless, leak-proof, and entirely surprise-free. On Earth, a restroom is a room. On the Moon, a toilet is a critical engineering node. If it breaks, the grand, majestic history of space exploration suddenly becomes very grounded, very unpleasant, and on top of that, very smelly. And that's exactly why I think the viewer needs to view the base as a living organism. It will have a heart, its power grid, lungs, the life support system, a digestive tract, water and waste recycling, a nervous system, comms and navigation, muscles, rovers and robots, skin, the module walls protecting against the vacuum, dust, radiation, and micrometeorites. A lunar base won't be a building. It will be a creature that NASA is teaching to live in a place where life is physically impossible. Now, let's step outside. First up, the spacesuit. NASA puts it perfectly. A spacesuit isn't clothing, it's a personalized spacecraft. It provides oxygen, maintains pressure, scrubs carbon dioxide, and shields you from dust, radiation, micrometeorites, extreme temperatures, and the glaring sun. Underneath the suit, the astronaut wears a special garment threaded with tubes of flowing water to keep their body cool. And here is a fascinating everyday fact that seems like a paradox to many. In space, the main problem usually isn't keeping a person warm, it's keeping them cool. In a vacuum, there's no air to carry the heat away from your body. On Earth, we sweat, the air blows over our skin, and the heat dissipates. Inside a spacesuit on the Moon, a person acts like a little furnace locked inside a very expensive thermos. That's why water circulates through those tubes under the suit, absorbing body heat and carrying it away to a cooling system. Space is freezing, but inside a spacesuit, you can overheat in a matter of minutes. It sounds like a joke, but it's actually one of the most serious engineering challenges of going out on a surface spacewalk.
So, we've stepped out onto the surface of the Moon. Ready for a leisurely stroll? Think again.
Another planet is no joke. On the Moon, an astronaut doesn't just go for a walk. They are performing grueling physical labor. You have to carry tools, drill, collect samples, set up instruments, climb into a rover, and get back to the airlock. And you're doing all of this inside a suit that simultaneously saves your life and fights your every movement. Sometimes I look at those Artemis renders where an astronaut is striking a heroic pose against the backdrop of a crater, and I think, behind that beautiful shot is a person who is most likely sweating, exhausted, checking their pressure, asking base command about their time limit, and desperately wanting to get back inside the pressurized module so they can finally climb out of that walking submarine. The primary mode of transportation for future settlers on the lunar surface will be rovers. This is where real lunar geography begins. Without a rover, an astronaut is tied to the base by a very short leash made of oxygen, time, and their own two legs. With a rover, the moon opens up. NASA is developing the Lunar Terrain Vehicle, or LTV, an unpressurized, open-air lunar buggy for astronauts in spacesuits. This is the workhorse of the base, driving to scientific sites, delivering tools, transporting samples, setting up equipment, and scouting the terrain. It will be able to operate with a crew, as well as autonomously or via remote control when there are no humans on the surface. Don't picture a joyride through a gray desert. This isn't a dune buggy on a beach. Under the tires, you've got regolith, sharp rocks, craters, steep slopes, and pitch-black shadows. There are no paved roads on the moon, no tow trucks, and no tire shops around the corner. If a rover breaks down far from the base, it's not a minor domestic inconvenience. It's a life-or-death survival issue. It's not a car in a parking lot. It's the only way to bring people back from an area where walking is too dangerous and where the temperature and the shadows could be something your suit was simply never designed to handle. The second vehicle is even more fascinating, the Pressurized rover, which NASA is developing in partnership with Japan. JAXA is slated to deliver it for the second phase of the moon base. This isn't just transportation anymore. It's a mobile home and a laboratory. According to NASA, a rover like this should be able to support 2 astronauts in regular clothes, no spacesuits required inside, for up to 30 days. It has to let them live, work, drive far away from the base, conduct research, and perform surface excursions out in remote areas. When you really think about it, that is a massive leap. The unpressurized rover just extends the radius of a stroll. A closed, pressurized vehicle changes the very definition of a base. The base is no longer just a dot on a map. It becomes a system that can move. A tiny home on wheels driving across the lunar wasteland. Inside, people are breathing, working, eating, monitoring instruments, sleeping, and planning their moonwalks. Outside, the unforgiving moon. Inside, human pressure, air, and I hope at least some decent coffee.
So where exactly are they going to drive? There are no neighbors, and there certainly aren't any scenic routes to take the wife and kids on a Sunday drive.
Primarily, they'll be driving for science. The lunar South Pole isn't just a pretty spot to plant a flag. It's home to permanently shadowed craters where sunlight hasn't reached for quite possibly billions of years. Scientists believe that these craters might hold deposits of water ice, and water on the moon is everything. Drinking water, oxygen, hydrogen, chemicals, rocket fuel, radiation shielding, life itself. That's why one of NASA's core ideas is to set up camp in a sunlit area for power and drive into the dark craters to gather science and resources. NASA says it straight up, the base location needs a ton of sunlight, access to water, good line-of-sight communication with Earth, and forgiving terrain. But these conditions rarely line up perfectly. A brightly lit spot is great for solar panels. Dark craters are interesting because of the ice, and the landing pad needs to be kept about 1 kilometer, over half a mile, away from the habitat module and the solar arrays, so the lander doesn't blast the base with high-velocity dust and rocks. In other words, the base won't be a single little house, but a sprawling, distributed system. Housing over here, power generation over there, the landing zone out there, a storage depot, a science pad, the rover's path, and that spot over there where you definitely shouldn't drive at night. I love this picture. It's not glossy, but it's real. The lunar base won't look like a gleaming city of the future. It'll look like a mining town, a polar research station, and a construction site all rolled into one. Tire tracks, cables, containers, antennas, solar panels, a landing zone off in the distance, rovers recharging, robots hauling cargo, and astronauts logging in their journals, dust got into the connector again. Thanks, Moon. Power is a whole different story. Without power, the base dies. You need electricity for air, heat, comms, computers, pumps, filters, the toilet, water recycling, charging the rovers, running the science instruments, and operating the airlocks. NASA describes its power evolution in phases. First, autonomous systems and heaters, then solar arrays, then radioisotope power systems, dust-resistant connectors, robotic cable laying, and wireless rover charging, and in a later phase, fission surface power, which is basically a surface-level nuclear reactor. That only sounds scary until you imagine a lunar night. Near the pole, the sun sits low on the horizon, shadows stretch forever, the terrain is complex, the dust gets into everything, and the cold absolutely murders batteries. Here on Earth, we don't think about electricity until the lights go out. On the moon, electricity is the temperature in your module, the oxygen in your lungs, and a working toilet. Very quickly, all the romance boils down to one simple question: do we have a stable kilowatt count right now or not? And this is where my own personal doubts creep in. NASA is building the right architecture, but it is monstrously complex. Rockets, landers, spacesuits, rovers, the habitat module, communications, power grids, water recycling, logistics, dust mitigation, radiation shielding. All of this has to work not just individually, but as a single cohesive system. If one element gets delayed, the whole chain starts to rattle. We are already seeing the Artemis timelines shift, and that's perfectly normal for spaceflight. But for the viewer, it's important to understand, a lunar base isn't a one-off event. It's a decade-long engineering marathon where every single step can turn out to be vastly harder than it looked in the presentation.
Now, I want to toss in an idea that probably wouldn't get me invited to a NASA boardroom meeting.
If NASA asked my opinion, I'd say, guys, let's take a more serious look at lunar caves. Not as some sci-fi trope, but as natural shelters. Hundreds of pits have actually been discovered on the moon, and some of them may lead directly into lava tubes. These structures formed when streams of lava flowed across the moon in its ancient past. The top layer cooled and hardened, while the hot lava kept flowing underneath, leaving behind a long, hollow tunnel. If the ceiling of that tunnel collapsed, it created an opening on the surface leading into an underground cavern, and that is mind-blowing. Studies have shown that certain shaded areas inside these lunar caves maintain a constant temperature of around 17 degrees Celsius, about 63 degrees Fahrenheit, which is basically room temperature. Meanwhile, up on the lunar surface, temperatures can soar to 127 degrees Celsius, around 260 degrees Fahrenheit, during the day, and plummet to minus 173 Celsius, minus 280 Fahrenheit at night. Lunar probes have already spotted over 200 of these pits, and in Mare Tranquillitatis, the Sea of Tranquility, not far from the historic Apollo 11 landing site, radar analysis has confirmed the presence of an underground tunnel that stretches more than 60 meters, about 200 feet from the entrance, and that's only as far as our radar could reach. Its true size is unknown. You could potentially fit an entire city down there. Why is this so important? Because a lunar cave already provides the very thing we are desperately trying to build artificially: overhead shielding. Thick layers of solid rock protect against cosmic radiation, solar flares, micrometeorites, and extreme temperature swings. On the surface, we have to bring our own shielding or build it from scratch, burying modules in regolith, 3D printing walls, hauling structural components, reinforcing the habitat. Inside a cave, geology has already done half the work for us. Sure, it's hard to get down there. Yes, you have to verify the structural integrity of the ceiling. Yes, you'd have to build an entrance, an elevator, pressurized sections, comms, and run power. But the core concept, living inside an ancient lava tube instead of baking on an open frying pan under a barrage of radiation, seems incredibly sensible to me. You might not remember it, but after our ancestors climbed down from the trees, they also loved settling in caves. There was definitely a good reason for that. Maybe we should take a page out of their book. So why pick the South Pole for the first lunar settlement? Well, it's no accident, of course. Sunlight, ice, resources, line-of-sight communication, and scientific intrigue. The caves of Mare Tranquillitatis aren't located where the current Artemis base camp architecture is focused. So it's not a simple swap where we can just say, hey, let's move the whole base into a cave. But as a long-term strategy, I would absolutely keep it in mind. The first base is at the South Pole for the ice. The next major base may be in a lunar cave for the shielding. If a genuine city ever springs up on the moon, I'm almost certain its habitable zones will be underground. Not because it looks cool,
but because the surface of the moon is simply too dangerous.
Still, the South Pole remains the prime candidate for our first outpost. Why?
Because it's where all our biggest interests intersect. Potential ice and permanently shadowed craters, areas with prolonged sunlight for power generation, scientifically valuable terrain, and the opportunity to test drive technologies for Mars. A lunar base isn't just about the moon. It's a dress rehearsal for interplanetary life. On the moon, we will learn how to live far away from Earth, repair systems, utilize local resources, work in spacesuits, operate robots, build infrastructure, and psychologically endure the fact that our home is no longer just a little blue planet in the vastness of space, but the entire accessible cosmos. When I was a kid, I used to look up at the moon and think it was almost close enough to touch. It hung in the sky like a lantern. I didn't understand why we couldn't just get up and fly there right then and there. Then I grew up, started reading reports, technical documents, studying astrophysics. Now I realize that the moon is only close to the naked eye. In terms of engineering, it is unimaginably far away. When NASA talks about the base, the question that excites me isn't just when will they build it. The question that excites me is what will the first normal, everyday life off-world look like? Not the ceremonial life, not the heroic life, but the mundane life. An astronaut wakes up, checks the oxygen levels, eats their packaged meal, brushes their teeth with a minimal squirt of water, complains about the toilet, climbs into a spacesuit, climbs into a rover, and drives to work. To work. Across the moon. It sounds absurd, but that is exactly how the future becomes reality. The most beautiful thing about a lunar base isn't the CGI render. The most beautiful thing is that first truly ordinary day. Not the flag planting, not the speech, not the breaking news headline, but a standard update. Crew has begun their shift. Rover is en route to the crater. All systems nominal. That's when we'll know that humanity hasn't just taken a step to visit another world. We've taken a step to live in another world. But we can't get complacent. The moon is absolutely going to test us. Dust will grind into gears, spacesuits will need redesigns, rovers will break down, deadlines will slip, budgets will inflate, politicians will shuffle their priorities, engineers will argue, astronauts will get exhausted, and every beautiful blueprint will crash headfirst into one simple truth. Space does not respect PowerPoint presentations. Space only respects working systems. And despite all of that, I want to see this base. Not the perfect one, the real one. With dust on the boots, cargo containers stacked by the module, a rover charging up before a drive, antennas, solar arrays, a tiny pressurized toilet that everyone is terrified of breaking, coffee out of a pouch, and an exhausted astronaut looking back at Earth, suddenly realizing up there are all the oceans, the cities, the forests, the people, the music, their childhood, the rain, the smell of fresh bread, and down here, a gray world, dead silence, and a tiny spark of human life. Maybe that's the whole point of a lunar base. It won't make the moon hospitable, it won't turn it into Earth, but it will prove that humans are capable of bringing life to a place where there never was any. Not because it's easy, but because that's just how we're wired. We look at the impossible, we get scared, we doubt ourselves, we try, sometimes we fall back, but we always return. You've been watching The Universe with Alex. I'm Alex Shane. Make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and from time to time, look up at the moon not just as a pretty object in the night sky, but as the future home of humanity. Extremely uncomfortable, highly dangerous, ridiculously expensive, but quite possibly our very first real address beyond Earth.
You've been watching The Universe with Alex. I'm Alex Sheen. Make sure to subscribe, drop a like, and from time to time, look up at the moon not just as a pretty object in the night sky, but as the future home of humanity. Extremely uncomfortable, highly dangerous, ridiculously expensive, but quite possibly our very first real address beyond Earth.